Perfect. So, yeah, this is Geoff Cars. He is the founder and CEO of Wilder Sensing, which is a nature tech company founded in 2021. And they use audio and artificial intelligence to quantify changes in biodiversity. I'm sure Geoff will tell you a little bit more about that. And Geoff's going to discuss designing bioacoustic surveys, so focusing on how to tailor your survey objectives, habitat conditions, and practical factors to create effective monitoring plans. Over to you, Geoff.
Thank you very much indeed, Ella. Yeah, Geoff Cass, I set up Wilder Sensing. The demand for good ecological data, biodiversity data is increasing rapidly because of things like TNFD coming down the pipeline, more private sector investment. And so 2.5 years ago, I was thinking, well, hang on, is it possible to get more ecologists to do more work? It takes a long time to develop the skills of an ecologist to become really pragmatic, and obviously the costs can be prohibitive. So I looked around and said, is there a solution which is low cost, which is scalable, both commercially and technically, which has got robust science behind it, and the results are auditable and people can relate to the results. And the only thing that really stood out at the time was acoustics, bioacoustics. So we developed a prototype to see if we can get this thing to work. We work a lot with Cornell University, some other universities, had a lot of MSc students work on this. So we launched this commercially about a year ago, and we're talking briefly about some of the things we've found since by taking a very data-centric view of what can happen. So we're going to go through how to design a survey, some of the key factors to consider this, recorder deployment and management. Paul's talk is going to go into a lot more of the technicalities of recorder configuration, all that kind of stuff. It's really important. How do you comparing site surveys and bioacoustic surveying? They've both got strengths and weaknesses, and touch on the special offer again. And yeah, we run Spring Watch, and I'll be touching on that a bit later on. Right. So just to explain how this thing works from first principles, we've got a lot of people on the call with very different backgrounds. So basically, the practical solution is once you've decided what your survey method is, and we'll come on to that in a second, you put your recorders out. They run for weeks or months, whatever the configuration is you've decided. Those files then get uploaded to our website through a file manager interface, and they can be pretty bulky files. If you've been recording for a long time, we then analyze those files. If you've been recording, say 24/7, and chunking it up into 1-hour files, it takes us about 20 seconds to analyze that file. We sample it every 3 seconds to say, in this 3-second sample, what, if anything's made a sound? So that sound, and it generates a result. It said it's 87% certain it was a specific species. And it could generate multiple results from that AI process. We then put it through a filter to get rid of all the spurious stuff. All the results go into a data lake with all the tools on, and this is what Kat's going to be exploring a bit later. And then depending on what you want to do, you might want to validate the results, think that this doesn't sound right, there's something odd, we're picking up something unusual. And an example of that, when we were on at RSPBR for Springwatch, we started picking up reports of a bird called a wood warbler, which hadn't been reported on site, and the BBC researchers went back and listened to the bits we tagged as a wood warbler, and they found indeed they were wood warblers, which was quite an interesting thing. Chris Packham got very excited about that. Now, if you're recording 24/7, and that's not necessarily always the best thing to do because of constraints such as battery life and site access, that will produce about 1.3 terabytes. That's an awful lot of data. We have no problem processing it, but there may be an awful lot of data to manage and upload to our site. So there are other sampling techniques or framing techniques we'll come on to. So just moving on. The most important thing here is really think through why you carrying out a bioacoustic survey, and there are many reasons why people do this. So you need to think about your survey methodology. Now, obviously, a lot of work's been done on bat methodology. In this particular session, we're focusing particularly on birds, which is probably a newer area. There's some really good guidelines published about 18 months ago. The link will be coming up in a few minutes. And I'll certainly, if you want to get into the background of methodologies, then please do have a read of that. So you want to say, well, why are we surveying this site? What's the purpose of it? And there are many reasons. It could be you just want to understand how the species richness is changing, what presence and absence there might be over periods of time. If it's a long-term survey, which could go on 3, 5, 10 years, is that assemblage changing? Is the interventions we're making on this site having an outcome that we would expect, i.e. attracting more wading birds or target species? Equally, you could be losing species. We've got sites where the water levels been raised because it's on deep peat, and some of the ground nesting birds have disappeared because it's no longer suitable. The grass is getting longer. So we're going to go through how and where to deploy recorders. How do you just decide how many recorders you want in which locations? And then I'll just say bioacoustics is becoming more widely adopted because increasingly it's proven to be pretty accurate. It's not perfect. I'll touch briefly on some of the limitations, but it's low cost. You've got, in effect, a pretty good ornithologist sitting in the wood or your field 24/7. So you're finding data and species that you would not pick up by doing a site survey. Quite often we'll pick up 20% more species than perhaps a site survey would. And also the results are verifiable or auditable. If you want to go back and listen to the recording saying, was it a wood warbler or was it a corncrake or whatever, that's absolutely possible. And because of it, we're taking all this complexity that we've been talking about today and really simplifying it for people. And I think that's all the benefit we bring to our customers is, so you can get many more stakeholders involved. We have lots of volunteers helping with some of the wildlife trust organizations we work with. They'll go and manage the recorders, upload the data, and that's what some people love, getting out into the field. One guy at 6 o'clock every Sunday morning, he's out there and he finds it enormously beneficial for him. Other volunteers are going through saying, I want to listen to all the calls of black-crowned night heron or whatever it might be, and saying, are they correct? And they, one guy said, you'd rather spend an evening listening to these kind of recordings than watching Strictly Come Dancing. So it's a good way of getting volunteers involved. But there are some limitations. One, we only report things that make a sound, and we have a model to identify that sound. Obviously, bats are well covered. Birds now, we work a lot with, say, with Cornell. One way of thinking about what we do is just we've taken Merlin. I mean, I'm sure many people on this call use Merlin as a free app on their phone. I use it. I think it's a fantastic thing. At the simplest level, we kind of industrialized that and made it available for long-term surveying. There are false positives and false negatives. There are some species where the calls are just so very, very similar that they can't be differentiated. Things like a hawfinch and one phrase in a robin call. We're taking other approaches using technology to overcome some of those things. And the other thing, we can't really quantify abundance. And when we get a count, it's a count of number of times a bird's called. We can't tell you if it's 100 calls, if it's one call or 100, one bird or 100 birds. Again, we're doing some research to try and overcome this. Maybe when we get to webinars next year, we can share what we've been doing to try and get a much better handle on abundance. So you have your site plan, you put your recorders in, you upload the data to our website, we run the AI, and we get massive amounts of data to give you insights as to what you can do or do on your site and how the site's changing. But you'll get millions of records. We have some sites now that will be producing 4 million records a year. Now that sounds a lot. Well, it is a lot compared to what previous methods. And but it can start to ask different questions, much more insightful questions, moving way beyond just presence or absence, and so much more about the dynamics of a site and how it's changing over time. So getting into the purpose of a survey, there's lots of guidelines for professional ecologists about different types of survey, your environmental impact assessment. They're all very structured, quite rightly. Guidance on the SIEM website. By the way, if anyone's going to the SIEM conference tomorrow and Thursday in Cardiff, we'll have a stand there, so please come and have a chat. But what we're seeing is a lot of non-specialists starting to use this technology. Wildlife trusts, citizen scientists, landowners. We work with a number of significant landowners. who said, look, I just want to understand this. If you make it simple for me, easy for me to understand what's going on. I'm not a bird specialist. And this whole market is emerging really quite quickly. And they want to understand other things like not just presence, absence, how species distributed across my landscape. So there's many ways of doing this. How is it changing over time? So when we get these big data sets, we find all kinds of insights. I'm going to steal a little bit of Kat's thunder, but I'll let her tell the story behind this in more detail. But there's as many of you know, there's a bird called a Chetty's warbler. It's a little brown thing that skulks around in ditches. It's not often you see it, but you hear it quite a lot. And when we started recording, this data just jumped out. So this is a screen grab from one of our analytic tools. So we just reported, the graph shows by month, different color lines, by time of day, and the number of calls. And I looked at this and thought, well, hang on a minute. This is quite remarkable. In April and May, we get this massive spike in calls from Chetty's warbler at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, I used to be a ringer. I'd never seen this before. And there's an interesting story. So I'll let Kat explain the background to this, which was quite a revelation for us. So, oops, this has jumped around a bit. So I want to spend a few minutes thinking about this. And these are all factors or considerations that go into a site survey plan. I really actively encourage you to put a template together. If you need one, we've got them available. But really can start to expand why you're going to do a survey, what the purpose is, how you're going to manage it. So to go through some of these things, like you may have a site where you've got a number of different habitats. You've got some woodlands, some farmland edge, or whatever it might be, some wetland. Think about how you're going to sample each of those. Do you want one recorder per site? Are there some parts of the site that may be changing faster than others? You may decide actually part of this site, we're not changing how it's being managed. It'll stay as traditional farmland. So maybe we use one or two recorders in that as a control site. So we can look at the net difference that we're making to look at the causality of what we're doing on that site. And that's not always possible, but sometimes control sites can be really valuable. The other thing is, how far apart do we space these things? Now, the bioacoustic guidelines I mentioned earlier, they talk about 250 meters. I think from our experience, 100 meters or 150 meters is fine. You're trying to avoid any overlap of birds being double counted from speaker to speaker. There are some species that this can be a challenge if you've got, don't put it near a rookery, basically. You just get rooks all the time. So it's at least 150 meters probably. And placement, how are you going to put them out in the field? A lot of people just bang in some posts and screw it to the post. Zip tie it to a tree, whatever's appropriate. I would say typically about 5 foot high, 5.5 foot high. For a number of reasons. One is it has to be easily manageable, so it has to be eye line or easy to get in and open the recorder. Quite practical things. If you're using one of the small devices, micro SD cards are really fiddly. If you drop them in long grass, I'd encourage you just to put a coat underneath if you're doing it, so you can catch the micro SD card. Placement is also important because of security. You want them discreet, hidden away a bit. But in the UK, we've had a few issues of them being not interfered with, but unintended consequences. We had a tractor run over one. We had cows basically breaking them off their brackets and just trampling them. We had one, it was shot, basically. Some kids were using it with target practice with an air rifle. So take all these factors into account. Paul's going to dig into this in a little more detail. When are you going to do the time recording? Is it just around dawn and dusk? Is it 24/7? We've got site customers who use it for nocturnal migration only. There's no right or wrong answer here. Just think about what the purpose of your survey is and what the right recording period is. Health and safety. How are you going to get around the site in a way which is safe? And I've issues with lone workers, for example. There was one customer I was talking to yesterday who said, look, the ideal site is in the middle of these fields, but it's so wet. We just can't have people going in there with waders at this time of year. It's fine in the summer, but this time of year, we physically cannot get access. We will not take the risk in terms of health and safety. Privacy, it depends on your site. whether you declare to people that this is being recorded. That could be important if you're a public sector organisation and want to be transparent about it. And the physical security, you don't want them stolen. Which recorder? I'll just explore briefly the different types of recorders. Paul go into more detail. Calculate your data volumes as well. That's quite straightforward to do. If you've got your sampling frequency, dawn and dusk or whatever, it can help you decide what your data volumes are going to be. One of the benefits of what we do, you can upload all your data to our website and we'll look after it for you. You don't need to keep backups. We back it all up. We use Amazon Web Services. As part of that, you're going to look at fixed and variable locations. Some customers just say have 4 or 5 recorders in fixed locations, and some recorders have been on site for over 2 years now in exactly the same location. So you can get really detailed time series comparative data sets. Other organizations, I'm thinking particularly of things like professional ecological consulting firms, they'll move from site to site as they're doing their surveys. They'll go on site, do a site survey, leave the recorders there for 2 or 3 weeks till the next site visit, take the recorders back or swap them over with new batteries and whatever. And so they're trying to get the balance right between the cost of going on site but getting good data. And I think that's a really good way to think about this stuff. The other thing is think, what's your management plan for this? You're going to start a project, and it could be running for, you could do it once a year, every other year, or whatever it might be. How is this going to be managed? Because that time series comparable data is really important. So you're going to say maybe using volunteers. How are you going to get volunteers engaged on an ongoing basis? Because people drop in and drop out of volunteer programs. Have they got the right infrastructure, the right training? If it's your staff that you're doing this with, how frequently can they get on site? And that's a really important point as to which recorders you buy. And then how are you going to do validation? If you're finding some really unusual and rare stuff, how are you going to validate those records? You can go and listen to recordings, but maybe there's someone who's a specialist in particular taxa that you might want to engage if that's appropriate. So just write this up in a plan, detailing all of the above, and so you're comfortable at the end of the day saying, right, that's a fair balance between these competing tensions of site access, costs, etc. So just touch briefly on which recorders to use. There's all the stuff that all the really good stuff that Paul's going to go into, but when you kind of boil it all down, and I like keeping things as simple as possible, the main 2 factors when deciding which recorder to use is the cost of the recorder and the cost of servicing the recorder and the battery life. Your sampling configuration, whether you're recording, say, dawn, dusk, 24/7, will have a significant impact on battery life and the amount of data to upload. One of the constraints might be your upload speed, and this is the upload speed. So if you use speedtest.net, just use that website. It'll do a quick test. It's an upload speed that you're looking for, not the download speed. If you're on fiber, that should be pretty similar. If you're on copper still, that they may be significantly different. Most people historically have faster download speeds because you're watching Netflix or whatever. We also, if we have some customers who are in very rural areas and they post us the cards, we've got one in offshore Tasmania, an island off Tasmania, where they're trying to do it with satellite, and it's probably quicker to post it to us realistically than try and get the data to get 50 gig of data from their server in offshore an island off Tasmania. So really, there's three options. I think when you kind of boil it all down, Songmeter Micro 2. It's a good entry-level device. We've had the previous version out for 2 years. All these devices are absolutely robust, unless they get shot or run by a tractor, of course. 4 AA batteries. They'll last at least 2 weeks. Put in a 64 gig card. The next one up is the Mini 2. You put more batteries in, basically. They'll last twice as long. Again, you can make it a bit longer if you've got you're only sampling, say, 10 minutes per hour or whatever. And the top of the range one is this lithium-ion based one where you can put lots of lithium-ion batteries in. These can last a long time. You need 2 sets of lithium-ion batteries. They're rechargeable, obviously, which is really fantastic. If you're only able to visit the site once every 2 or 3 months, this could be a really good option. They are more expensive. They're probably, as Paul touched on this, 3-4 times the price of a Micro 2. So it's kind of horses for courses, but it's it's really important to think through the right device for the right purpose. People start out with, say, an entry-level device, that's fine, and then perhaps graduate to some of the more sophisticated ones. We don't sell these, go through NHBS. The other thing as well, people get excited and don't want to get started, quite rightly, but just think about your medium and long-term reality of managing your recorders. You think, well, we've got volunteers, but we've had cases where volunteers have gone off sick, they're no longer involved with volunteering, and so having someone on site every week wasn't really feasible because you end up with big gaps in the data you're recording, and that can be quite frustrating. So you may want to get something a bit better with less reliance. The other thing I'd say is there were some guidelines published about 18 months ago on long-term ecoacoustic monitoring. It's quite technical. If you want to dig more into the subject, have a read of it. There's a couple of most of it's absolutely solid. The only thing I slightly disagree with is some sampling is a data volumes is a constraint. I think with what we do, we've taken away that constraint. If you want to upload, a terabyte of audio per recorder per year, that's absolutely fine. That's what we deal with. We deal with staggering amounts of audio data. We're processing this week. We'll probably process 40,000 hours of audio, generating millions of records as a consequence. So that constraint doesn't really exist. It's more about the batteries and site access than anything else. A couple of points to finish up on. This is something I presented with Atkins at the Chartered Institute of Ecologists and Environmental Management last year. There was a bit of a comparison between doing a site survey, which is obviously the traditional and primarily the current method of professional ecologists doing surveys, and comparing it to what we're developing. Now, both have got strengths and weaknesses. We're not necessarily replacing what site surveys do. We're kind of extending and complementing it in ways which people being on site can't do. So one thing we found is the bias or the inexperience of a surveyor. If you send one person on site who's highly skilled, they'll pick up a lot more things than perhaps someone less experienced. And we've seen this when people are going through doing validation. The more junior people might go through and check the records, saying, was it a lapwing, was it a redshank or whatever, and reject things, saying that wasn't a lapwing or whatever. And then someone more experienced go in and say, no, actually it was because of it's a different call or whatever it might be. And obviously we can do this 24/7. So we get really accurate long-term time series data. So obviously going on site can be expensive. You've got maybe 1 or 2 people going on site. It's actually a work-life balance thing as well. Access restrictions, getting access to, say, rail side could be really, really difficult, or going onto a very protected site where you've got some really rare breeding birds, going on site on a regular basis just isn't possible. We also find bird disturbance can be a consideration, and there's some really good work done by Carlos Abraham looking at capercaillie, and physically going on site was disturbing the lekking behavior of the capercaillie. And we also find we can pick up lots of species of birds, 20-30% more species than you would by doing a site survey, and particularly areas that are under-recorded. Having said that, we can't pick up things that aren't making a noise. And so traditional surveys can make visual identifications. It's not a particularly good way of assessing abundance. And obviously anything more than 100 meters away, we're not going to be able to pick it up. We just can't hear the sound. And sometimes if we're getting high levels of background noise, that can be a limitation. Having said that, we've got sites which are heavily industrialized, and we're still getting a good species mix coming out of it, which kind of reconciles with what the surveyors, the ecologists are finding on site. So finally, Paul touched on this earlier. We're coming up to Christmas. I asked one of the AI image generation tools to produce an image coming up to Christmas of what a British wintry Christmas scene might look like with animals in it and birds. And this is what was produced. And that thing at the bottom looks almost more like a seal than anything else. It's a bit strange. Anyway, if you take out a subscription with us, our platform is based on the number of recorders you deploy. It's a subscription per year. If you take one or many out with us before the 31st of January, there's a 25% discount. Obviously, you get pre-postage and packing from NHBS. If you're interested in this, just send us a message through our contact page. The other thing which we're more than happy to share is we did a case study on the BBC Springwatch programme we were on. Again, if you want a copy of that, just let us know and we'll share that with you. So at that point, I'm going to stop and hand back to